Good morning and welcome. I am Michael Bartlett.
I'm Merrylin LeBlanc. Hi, Michael.
Hi, Merrylin, and welcome to Deep Dives with New Perspectives. If you like our show, please hit like, hit subscribe, tell your friends, ask questions. We're here thinking about all kinds of different things that are going on and ways of interpreting the world using the astrological lens. And in order for us to really even consider anything, there's one planet in particular that kind of has to deal with like our thoughts, the way we move, even our mind in a sense, right? I mean,
Yes, actually, the planet that we're thinking of plays a whole role in how our mind operates, along with the moon and Mercury. We're talking about Mercury, right?
Yes, we are.
The moon and Mercury are very much caught up in the mind, and I mean, psychologists, psychiatrists, whatever their labels, have written volumes about the mind. And from an astrology perspective, the mind is caught up with our consciousness, and there are many ways in which we access what we're aware of. And so, I think I may have mentioned this on one of our deep dives before. I know I've talked about it on Moonwise, um, how some neuroscientists, different labels, neurosurgeons, neuro whatever, have, and one in particular that came into my awareness is Eben Alexander, who's a neurosurgeon who went into a deep coma for a week. His colleagues gave him a 3% chance of coming out of it. But even if he did, they thought there would be significant brain damage. Well, after a week, he awoke. And he's written several books, and he writes about this in a book on consciousness. And he said in his training that, many neuroscientists say when the brain dies, consciousness dies. And, his brain was barely functional according to their technology and beliefs. And yet he went into a state, which he now calls a near-death experience, where his consciousness was even more acute than it was in his waking states. And he writes about that as well. And, has come to the point that he goes, no, our consciousness, and he's pursued looking at a lot of, near-death experiences. I'm an author by the last name of Moody has written volumes about that. And he's a philosopher, college professor, whatever. He's got all kinds of titles after his name and academic achievements. And, science, it can't explain this other part. This is where our occult sciences, if you want to call them that, have other ways of knowing. And Carl Jung was in that realm too. He looked at the noetic sciences, those that tell us things beyond the rational mind. And Mercury deals so much with the rational mind, as well as the other part, the conscious mind. But the moon is more into the consciousness. But the two together really make up our personal consciousness and add a lot of information in terms of our social consciousness. Because Mercury is a social sign as well. It has a lot to do with our relationships, starting with our siblings and our families.
And you know what I hear you speaking to is the psychopomp quality of Mercury. I mean, Mercury has this liminal quality. He has this ability, as we've spoken before, of being able to go down in the underworld and hang out with his brother Hades or Pluto, as we know him now, or hang out on with the mortals, and come up to and hang out with the gods up on Mount Olympus. He has this very interesting thing. So while you talk about being conscious, he's also like the ability to go and weave us between the conscious and the unconscious. And I think it's interesting because people now, almost anyone will talk about Mercury retrograde periods, right? And they know nothing about astrology, but they know about Mercury retrograde. It's like, well, how come all of a sudden people know about Mercury retrogrades? Well, when you think about like the internet and automobiles and I don't know what else, everything we do,
Well,
electricity.
yeah, our traveling to work and what we do on a daily basis at work.
Through Virgo,
Kind of work that we actually enjoy doing
right?
on a daily basis that's related to Mercury,
Right.
extremely so. So,
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, sorry. And then, and then there are the two faces of Mercury. And you and I did a Moonwise talk on this years ago about the two brothers, Prometheus and Epimetheus.
Right.
Prometheus, who brought fire to humans. He thought humans needed some fire. He thought he was doing a good job. Well, Zeus really didn't appreciate that because fire was really meant only for the gods. And then, so Prometheus is always looking forward, how do we bring the idea forward? How do we get that flash of insight? And yet Epimetheus, his brother, is always looking behind. He can't do anything without seeing it within the framework of what is. And so they talk about, the two faces of Janus, it ties into that, the forward thinking and the backward thinking. But also, what we're kind of dancing around a little bit, and we've just had such a strong influence of it, is Aquarius. If we think of Saturn and Uranus, because in the old days, they didn't know about Uranus. They didn't know about Uranus until 1781, I think it was. So Uranus was not known in the ancient field. So a lot of Uranus's traits have in the old days were really more in the realm of Mercury. So when you think about those insights and think about going and doing these deep journey works and saying things shockingly and provocatively, that was the art of Hermes, the ancient name for Mercury. There are so many hymns, he was the god of bards and musicians and storytellers. And I think isn't one of the introductions of one of Shakespeare's plays begin with this whole, oh Hermes, grant me guide my quill, something like that, or am I just making that up?
I'm not a Shakespeare scholar, so I can't, pull that one out of my hat.
But he was, a lot. Of course, there's the idea of the muses back in the ancient world, but Mercury was kind of like the one that allowed the information to kind of all filter through and be processed in some kind of coherency. And I think one of the crucial things when it comes to Mercury, as far as understanding about astrology and understanding about individuals, is thinking about all of us have a very different way of processing, seeing, and communicating with the world. And astrology teaches that. And from my friends who I know who have Mercury retrogrades or have Mercury in the water signs, their experience in school was not very easy.
The water signs, I would agree with you on that. I'm a Mercury retrograde, and I didn't have any problems in school. I was an A student pretty much throughout all my schooling.
You have all that Aquarius in you.
Well, yeah, it's an Aquarius. It's an Aquarius Mercury. Yeah.
So it's just like, feed me more, feed me more, feed me more.
And the other thing, I think it's Rudyard who writes about this when he talks about Epimethean and Promethean and he breaks Mercury into 4 categories. Those that are direct Promethean, which I believe is you, and those that are retrograde Promethean, and then those that are direct Epimethean, and those that are retrograde Epimethean. I'm retrograde Epimethean, which he says in one of his articles is can be mistaken for a Promethean because it's sort of like a balsamic phase, and actually, even though Mercury only goes like 28 degrees away from the sun. You know, if you were to look at them in terms of the distance between them, it would be considered a balsamic phase in my case. And my Mercury's only 2 degrees away from the sun, and so there is this kind of ability to pull things out of, and I've had friends, astrology friends even, who have said to me, how did you come up with that? Where did that come from? And I'm going, I don't know, it just popped into my head, kind of thing. And that's part of that difference and whatnot. And I've been doing on Moonwise some shows with individuals, and one will be coming up not this week, but maybe the week after that. We haven't recorded it yet, but where I'm looking at how their consciousness works. And I'm using what we're saying about Mercury as well as what can be said about the moon in their chart and putting those things together. And it's uncanny. It's even uncanny to me how much it reflects one's consciousness and behavior.
Well, it's very interesting as you say that, because the correlation that pops into my head is in esoteric astrology. Those are both what are considered fourth ray planets, and fourth ray is considered harmony through conflict. And what are the two things that get us most in trouble in the world? Our words and our emotions, right? And so how those two work together is really crucial about how socialized you are, how conscious you are, and if you're really catching the cues. And again, I think a lot of that also has to do with the planetary signs. A lot of people, it's like the water signs, they're feeling that environment. They're a lot of times I feel like in some of the retrogrades, and sorry for keeping to lump this in there, but I think people with retrograde Mercury and people with water Mercury tend to be hearing or sensing things that are probably not their own. And one of their big things is understanding what is theirs. And I think especially with the retrograde, it's really about understanding what is yours versus what is someone else's. Whereas I think with the water signs, it's like, I think of with Pisces, they're a psychic sponge. So I mean, there are things that are literally coming at them, words, images, spirits talking to them maybe, or other things. But there's all this information literally flooding their system. I think Mercury and Aquarius is also another information flooding Mercury. And then it's just like, give it to me, give it to me, give it to me. And like what you say is working. I mean, with the sun there, that really helps you. And they call that an detriment, right? The sun in Aquarius. And here it is like, you're an oracle in that sense. Like you just,
Well, Mercury though is strong in Aquarius, not,
I think so too.
That's part of the difference as far as that goes. But one of the things that, if we look at phases and phase relationships, I can see what you're saying about an Epimethean Mercury retrograde, because it's like the balsamic phase, which is, there's kind of this Piscean kind of no boundaries between things. Is that person's thoughts or my thoughts kind of? But makes me curious, and I have to dig up Rudyard's article, because I'm wondering about the retrograde Promethean Mercury and how that dynamic operates, because that's more of a new phase of Mercury and the sun. So
it's a little more cautious.
Aries. So it's more of an Aries process. And with that process, Aries, one of the things that it's represented by Aries is the brain and the rational mind. But also with that fire energy is also intuition. And so here we kind of go into that difference of the quality of intuition that comes out of water and the quality of intuition that comes out of fire. We have names. We'll say, oh, they're, hunches, their psychic revelations or whatever. And I would think that's more balsamic and more, but people that the readings, and I haven't done this in a long time, I've done on the intuitive mind. um it it's caught up in a lot of semantics, and I've yet, and I'm not saying there isn't some literature out there, I've yet to read something that really clearly delineates those differences between um, the psychic input. How different is that from the intuitive
Oh,
input,
right.
or is there any difference?
Right.
But maybe
Well,
it is in the way it's
yeah,
accessed.
right. Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think for some, yeah, it's like, is it a felt sense? Like they talk about, clairvoyant, clairaudient, clairsentient, there's,
Right.
do you sense things? Do you hear things? Do you feel things? Clairaudient would be the hearing things. Do you, maybe you hear things, but it's not really with these ears, they're not with your physical ears. You kind of hear, you know, I say the voice, do you hear the voices is typically one of the things they say with people with Mercury in the 12th house or Mercury in Pisces. And that can be any range of things. And I don't mean it like in a psychotic way, like kill them. There's nothing like, it's like not that thing, but it's like there.
Not schizophrenic or anything.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I mean, I think there could be a possibility, and that's a really good thing you kind of lead into. You can kind of tell what type of mental issues an individual is going to have by the relationships Mercury makes in the chart with other planets and its placement. That's really going to tell you, is this person going to be, some people do really well with the written word. Some people do really well with imagery. Some people do really well with a story being told to them. These are the different ways we process information. And I think that's what I was alluding to earlier when I was talking about, when we have 12 examples of how to understand and view the world, how can we go to one type of school and think that it's going to satisfy everyone? Not everyone's going to fit in that square peg. I mean, you as an educator, I mean, you told me on several occasions you were addressing this already back in the 60s, as far as like how boys and girls are being raised and taught, and the differences in support, quote, supporting them.
Right. It was actually the 70s, but
Sorry, I had a feeling I was going a little bit too early, and I apologize completely.
whatever. No, and what's amazing me is, even to this day, you find situations in which, men and women, and this is all part of the women's movement, let alone, different sexual preference movement, where I'm sure that comes, some of this dynamic, it comes to that. It is those subtleties that people don't even recognize in their interactions, of how they treat people different, the things behind the words. Oh, I'm addressing a man, and how I say this. We don't go through that. How I say this is going to be different. Do I just say what I'm going to say, whether I'm dressing a man or a woman, or somebody with a different sexual preference? Basically, either way, some people automatically initiate communication in different ways,
Right.
and they're not even conscious of it. And yet, I know in my educational experience back in the 70s, we were receiving training in that. We were told to look at how we treated boys in a classroom differently from girls in a classroom, and start adjusting. And yet, I actually, when I moved here to Santa Fe and had the opportunity to work with people who could have been my students when I was teaching. And because many of us teachers back in the 70s, uh, really felt like we wouldn't we wouldn't see the changes that we were being asked to make. And yet, when I've worked with younger people, I'm not all, but there were significant situations where I thought, oh, that difference is happening, where there isn't these kinds of deferences or special kinds of addressing. And I can, I can remember communicating with my teacher friends back in California and saying, you know what? I think, it's subtle, but I think we did make a difference. We started something. And that takes me to astrology, to, like we had in the 70s, we had Pluto in Libra, which is about our relationships. And Mercury, obviously, every year is in every single sign for a period of time. Often, you know, pretty much a month unless it's retrograde. But it just, I think that usually when I think about Pluto and Libra, I think about relationships and how they change, because divorces and whatnot became commonplace and in that period of time. But also on a much more subtle level, the whole issue of equality and how we treat people. So there's a shift that went on in that period. It wasn't mainstream, but people who worked in situations with large groups of people, teachers, for example. I mean, where else do you find 30 people? I mean, this isn't New Mexico, this is California. Where else do you find 30 people in a room that's, maybe 30 by 30 feet with only one supervisor? This is one of the images that we used to use when we were bargaining for, better conditions and all. But yeah, so the Mercury, I have to look at that a little more carefully. Mercury played a huge, because Mercury's a teacher and Mercury's a relationship. But getting back to Mercury also, Mercury about relationships, Mercury ruling the natural zodiac signs of Gemini and Virgo. And you mentioned before we went on the air that one of the relationships we have is that with animals, especially our pets. And some astrologers refer to pets in the realm of Virgo, often because when you go back to the farming years, it was pretty much the pets were pretty much for functional reasons, keep the bears away from the trees that bear the fruit, or
Your beehives,
get rid of the rodents that are infesting
the chicken coop.
yeah, exactly, and all of that sort of thing. And I think that's where the Virgo tendency comes about. But also when you think about work as human beings, um, many of the relationships we form, not necessarily the significant other relationships, are formed because of the work we do. Like you and I know each other because of our interest, and I'll broaden it, not just astrology, but the mantic arts. And that's, we met through a mutual friend, but also the mutual interests, which has kept the relationship going. And so in some ways there's Mercury in that realm too. So the Mercury takes us into relationships with living beings, either whether the plants, I mean, Virgo has to do with the plant world, whether they're edibles or not, and we have a relationship to them.
Yeah, I think of Virgo as like nature and animal husbandry in a sense, even though it's, probably should be animal midwifery in a sense, actually, because it's not really, there's another one of those co-opted words, right? But one of the things that it's like what kind of hits me too is, that old saying that we say, like if you put an elephant in a room and 7 scientists who are blindfolded and have them touch different things, it's the same thing. Like if you put 12 people in a room, it'd still be the same thing. And that's the aspects with astrology. And it's, all of us have this kind of inherent way we look at and process the world. And some signs, I think, especially the latter three, especially, are really good at kind of understanding and integration of them, because I like to always think of the signs as being developmental on a certain level, and so therefore having um, ever more complexity in their range of expression, so to speak. Meaning the planets that appear there have a little bit are blanketed more, just like the outer planets tend to have a larger, longer range of expression along a continuum. But with those sorts of Mercuries, it just gives us different ability to understand and see the world. And I think some people can be really flooded by it. And what I was talking about a little bit earlier has to do with and I've talked about it before, mental health issues. I mean, that's one thing you can kind of sometimes see, like what's going on with Mercury in the chart. Is Mercury sometimes, if Mercury is a feral planet, meaning it's by itself, it's not making any aspect, or it's retrograde, a child may speak later than another child, or might stutter. I had Mercury trines Uranus. I didn't talk for, I think, like the first 2 years, and I did like weird things. Like my grandmother had this story about when I was visiting, I kept saying fine a hamburger, fine a hamburger. And so she thought, oh, well, he must want, that was the days, McDonald's was really big in the early 60s or late 60s, sorry. I'm losing my decades this year, today. And so she got me like a burger and gave it to me, and I just was like, and what it was is there was a free offer being given of a flying hamburger or something. You remember the marketing was so, I mean, now like you can't even watch any show without it being completely targeted, but that was when they were kind of starting to test out, like, oh, we can get more parents into McDonald's if we give all these kids, we'll get the kids to like manipulate their parents and grandparents. So I was a prime example of that, but here I am, like, not able to say things. And then one of the other things that would always embarrass my mom, hello, I have a Scorpio moon. I had another word for truck that really was not appropriate because I couldn't say the TR sound.
Oh.
So, and I would, I would name truck.
And your parents were wondering. I of course I don't know your parent. Well, I met them once, but I don't know, whether they're into swear words or not, and they might have been like, where did he hear that? I mean, that might have been like one of your early experiences of being punished.
Right, exactly. I mean, here's that moon Mercury thing, like you're talking about, because that's the other thing I find, like children who have, say, a Pluto Mercury or Mercury in Scorpio, they can't help but say what they're feeling. So if mom and dad are arguing, or mom and dad are having some kind of an issue, or something else weird is going on in the household, that kid's going to speak it. They're not going to understand, because when you think about it, a child doesn't have a perspective. Did you ever see the movie The Fall? It's such a great way of, it's interesting because it's kind of shows the dichotomy of like the world viewed through a child's eyes, and then what's going on for the adult, right? Because when we're young, there's no way we can understand. Mark Twain saying is, I couldn't believe how stupid my parents were, but at 18, but by the time I was 21, I realized how brilliant they were. It's this thing, like when we're teenagers, we're so omniscient, we know so much, but then life has a way of showing us all that we do not know.
Yeah, interesting. Yes, part of that whole process.
But Mercury, I mean, and that's, I think, I think for like me, when I do chart readings and when I work with people, I find I have a lot of compassion for the moon and the Mercury, and it's I really like that you put those two together, because I don't think we really talk about that a lot in traditional, or modern astrology that much, like putting those two together. And I think there's so much in that. Is there, like, yeah, like you said, with mine, Scorpio moon, there's going to be a shame factor, and then I have Mercury in Capricorn, so I'm going to say things and think I'm being really intelligent and smart about it, but might be having a little bit of a bite to it coming from the Scorpio side.
That can be true. Yes, exactly. having
A lot of things going on with Mercury this month, right? Mercury went into Mercury
it
goes.
went into Taurus this past weekend. It met up with the sun. And of course, because Mercury's only like 24, 28 rather degrees away from the sun at its farthest direction, we have what we have these two conjunctions. We don't have a full cycle in terms of a first quarter, a full phase, a last quarter phase. But in Rudyard's calculation, this particular Mercury Sun coming together was a full phase. And one of the easy ways to tell that now, the sun has moved on off of that 30th degree. The sun has moved into Taurus. Oh boy, warmer days ahead, hopefully. But if you look at that, which of the two is faster in terms of moving around the zodiac?
Mercury.
The sun or Mercury?
Mercury.
The sun. And so the sun is...
Mercury goes around the zodiac 3 times in a year. It goes around every 88 days.
Goes around the sun?
It's at an 88-day orbit.
It doesn't go around it goes around the zodiac, yes.
Oh, sorry. Well, if it goes around the sun, doesn't that technically mean it goes around?
No, it's always.
Oh, I see what you're saying right now. I'm
degrees.
sorry, you're right. I was messing myself in my own
That's
head.
my way of saying that. No, the sun is faster.
Thank
because Mercury does its retrograde thing and back and forth. And so if you look at them, and ask yourself the question, well, the sun's in Taurus now. Mercury is going there too, but the sun is ahead of Mercury in moving through the zodiac. And so it's like a new phase. You just have to ask yourself which is faster. And the only planet that is not faster than, that is faster than the sun is the moon.
Because every 28 days it does a whole rotation around.
Right. I think that's where the confusion came. Oh boy, how do we keep all of this in our heads?
I know, and it's so funny because we're talking, like any number of times, you and I are either writing or speaking about either what has happened in the past, what's going to be happening, what's going on right now, and like every once in a while, it's just like blah, 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 blah. It's like when you have 12 or 15 kids, you're going to misname them call them by the wrong name every once in a while.
Well, it's sort of like being a psychotherapist.
Well, yeah.
There's all these variations. And how do they, keep track? And they may say right away, well, I know what's going on here. And just like an astrologer would say, oh, I see what's going on here. But it's different from everybody else. And so, yes, you have to that's probably why therapists don't say much.
Well,
the astrologer is expected to say it all.
Well, I think, to be honest, it would be really great if more therapists used astrology. Carl Jung did, because, like I said earlier, there so much is going to show up in the chart as far as developmental issues, mommy and daddy issues, relationship dynamics, how one is likely, the type of issues you're likely going to have to deal with over the course of your life. And isn't it great to go and see an astrologer and have a reading over the course of an hour, hour and a half, and learn about kind of like what your life is, rather than spending I don't know, every week or every other week.
About a year spending almost the same amount of money.
Right. Or take your reading, after you get an astrology reading, take that and decide what it is you want to work on, and then find a therapist or a healer or someone who will help you work on these different issues as you want to do with it. But be more pointed about it. It's not like this ongoing issue, because the truth is, and what's funny about about therapy, is that you can spend 20, 30, 50 years talking to a therapist and still have the same issues, because it really is about what you want to face and what you want to bring to the therapist. And if you don't bring those issues to the therapist, there's not anything that's going to be going on.
And that's why we've seen a lot of changes in the therapeutical, psychological world of careers, because you have now many psychotherapists who have gone to coaching, because in the typical model of psychotherapy, you don't tell the client anything, you just listen and maybe suggest periodically, oh, this, but there's this whole long process. And I've heard many people, I've not said this, but I could probably be in the same camp because I've done different kinds of therapy, and who have said, I spent all these years and stuff and I just have no use for it. I don't, gain anything. But there are therapeutical processes. You do core, I don't,
Energetic.
energetics, family constellations,
Beautiful.
different people who have the credentials but yet go to coaching, where you're going to find processes that hopefully you'll find a process out of it.
And
In the
here's,
end,
these are all Mercury concepts, right? And it's about,
right?
and I really think 90% of our issues have to do with the fact that we are our astrological chart, that we start, actually I'm thinking about, I want to do an article on the modalities, because I think it's so crucial to see like each of the modalities has such a crucial way that how we look at the world, but each of them is so important and we need to rotate, and so, and the classic thing is like the fixed signs, we can become so fixed on certain things and not really want to change. And as we grow older, it's really important to keep our options open. It's really important to keep moving. It's really important to try and not say no to life, because it's so easy as we get older to just start closing down these little parts, and we have to keep making relationship to life. And I really think, and speaking to Mercury, I think as we get to the end of our life, I think our ability to grok and to grasp what it is that's going on in an age ceases to occur. There's like some sort of a operating system, so to speak. Like when all of a sudden your phone or your computer like says, oh, it's time for you to do an update. I think some people are like, I'm done with the updates. I don't want to update anymore. I don't have any more room in my being to understand this new way of being. Like when you think about when computers came along, how many people, like our grandparents, my grandparents, there's no way they would have ever been interested in computers. That would have been something, I mean, it would have been like a novelty, but it would have been something like, oh, well, we'll keep that and use it for special occasions or something. It's not, and so I think, each age has its zeitgeist, of course. And I just think that
Yeah.
we have.
And there are individuals, I mean, just in that example, there are individuals that I can remember, the emergence of computers, and there are individuals who go, everything I need to do is on this, and they didn't learn at 1.0. There's stages in which the industry that develops computers, et cetera, changes their operating systems in such a way that you have to upgrade or you're left behind. And not too long ago, I had this conversation with a person who was, one of those, everything I need to do, and realized that, couldn't get that computer fixed anymore. Nobody knows, nobody has the parts, nobody has, whatever. And it, we're hooked. I love the technology and we're hooked, and I love the technology and we do not know for certain energetically what it's doing to us. It's a grand experiment. I have compassion for people who are sensitive to this technology, and but I'm addicted. That's my addiction.
I have to say, like I mean, I was really fortunate in college at UC Santa Cruz. My roommate went over. We went over to San Jose and to Silicon Valley back in the day. I was from San Jose anyway, and he bought one of those big early computers, and I did some of my papers for college in the '80s actually on a computer. With what was it, Word Perfect, I think it was the DOS program at that time, just before Apple came out, and then we got Apple. But I remember just going like, oh, my little Aquarian side was like, oh, there's no way these are going to be these aren't going to go anywhere. This is just going to be like a little fringe thing. Like I like completely was clueless. But the truth is, my accounting work that I do, the astrology work that I do, when I was working in the auction house, the stuff that we're doing right now, every single thing I do, I could not do all the things I do in life, writing the book that I did, if it wasn't for a computer. I mean, like the sheer amount of work one can get done in this lifetime is, go ahead.
How un-Aquarian of you. That must be the Capricorn part of you, because back, and I'm talking in the 70s, the latter part of the 70s, a junior high teacher who is a friend, after school, later in the afternoon, he invited any teachers who were interested to come to his classroom, and he'd teach us how to code for the initial Apple. Okay. I had that experience, and my my reaction was, when I was able to, and I was in graduate school working on towards a dissertation, towards a doctoral degree. And I can remember going, oh my God, this is like heaven. Every kid from the beginning of their schooling should have access to this technology. And when I was a school principal, we had special funds that always came in. And I, in the planning stages, I made a proposal to the teachers. I said, we can only get 10 computers. We only have money for 10 computers. And they said, well, what do we do? And I said, we can start a center. And I said, this will grow. Well, 2 years later, they had 30 computers, enough for a classroom to come through, et cetera. This is a, early, end of 70s or early 80s kind of situation. And, I mean, I had that right from the beginning. I just thought that, and for me, it was something, because I remember when I got my master's degree, there was a friend who was a really good typist, and said I would pay her to type for me, because I mean, I'd have these pages with arrows all over and I'd go crazy. And I'm going, just what a computer, that compared to what a computer could do, I thought, oh no, finally I saw it.
The cut and paste option was just like,
it freed up my writing in a way that, because I just thought, no way. So I just had that complete opposite reaction.
Now, once I started enjoying it and doing it, I mean, I have to tell you, I mean, like I said, I mean, I really fully enjoyed it. But I mean, at first I have to say,
back to Mercury. You have Mercury in Capricorn. I have Mercury in Aquarius. So it's sort of like, okay, there you go. And it's like my Mercury, this is another part of the Mercury thing, besides being retrograde, is on a degree of Aquarius that's represented by a rug on the floor for a child to play in. But it's like it's the child is leaving the rug, and it's sort of like, I'm not going to stay within the boundaries. I allow my mind to go outside the boundaries. And I'm go, okay, just because they said that. And it's so funny, because I recently was in a used bookstore here looking for not an astrology book, but they didn't have what I was looking for. But I looked at their astrology section, and there were these two astrologers I never heard of before, who wrote this book back in the 60s about psychology and astrology. And I flipped through and I thought, this is really interesting, very much into Jung. And so I ended up buying the book, but my first reaction was, oh, there's so many ideas that have evolved that I wanted to kind of like put it aside. But I recognized that from a psychological perspective, these two individuals, a man and a woman, and I don't remember their names off the bat, but they were, in my mind, ahead of their time then, just kind of that leap forward. So, Michael.
Beautiful. Are there any more words left to speak about Mercury? I would imagine so. I'm sure we could probably speak for a few days.
Yeah, Mercury is extremely active these days. I'm just checking to see where, yeah, Mercury's into Taurus on the 3rd degree of Taurus, very
There's
big sort of
Sun,
the,
Venus,
yeah, all
Uranus.
this Taurian stuff. And so I guess we're just taking a lot of pleasure in our ability to communicate and elaborate and propose and the and the list of ideas about Mercury goes on and on.
Yeah, I mean, with Venus and Taurus, it's just like it's making really eloquent speech. It's, it's embellishment is one of the things that I think of, right? Mercury, Venus, but also with Uranus in there and the sun, like we might want to, Uranus and Taurus, I always think is like, turning over the ox cart, like what kind of, what do you call it? A disturber of the peace.
Yeah, well, Mercury, Venus first, I think, and then Mercury meets up with this weekend, well, Thursday, and then on Sunday early morning, they meet up with Uranus. So we'll soon find out what if there's a disruption or if there is an opportunity to do something unusual that we normally wouldn't even think of doing.
Yeah, like Chauvin's trial, how that's turning
Uh,
out, that's gonna be very interesting because that could be, I mean, it's, I'm hoping that there's been so much evidence, but we'll see. Anyway, how can people find you?
Oh, moonwiseastrology.com is my website. Merrylin LeBlanc at gmail.com is my email. It's also there on the website. Phone number 505-690-1878.
And you can reach me at michael@coremichael.com or look at my website, coremichael, that's C-O-R-E, michael.com. My phone is 505-690-3860. Also, if you're enjoying this talk about Mercury, I'm giving a free talk on Mercury for the Stormy Grace YouTube Academy. Just dial in the numbers. It's going to be on the 29th of April, sorry. So tune in if you want, and it'll be available after that. Take care. Have a great day.
All right. Bye-bye, Michael. Bye-bye, everybody.
Take care. Bye.